So let's talk about fear, let's talk about the unknown, let's talk about longing, and let's talk about time. And maybe we can just talk about all of those things individually, and then at a certain point just connect them together. Okay. So let's first talk about time. And then we'll talk about... Hello?
Hello.
Then we'll talk about just life, because it's for the most part unknown, and then the fear it causes, and then I suppose longing for stability of sorts. Okay, time. At, I suppose, the very center of all these questions is the human being. I don't know if dogs ask such questions. I know that some animals are quite intelligent and they're very complicated, like elephants, who mourn the loss of a child or a companion. And every year they go back to the gravesite and cry for a while and then walk away. But for them it happens instinctually. I'm not quite sure if that's the case for us. And I suppose we write and we create movies and we write books because we're trying to discover where exactly we belong in the grand scheme of things. So, how does time relate to us? Well, there are three areas or three stages to time. One is the past, one is the future, and the other is the present. And our difficulty is that we yo-yo, we walk into one aspect of time, and then we use this with it has lots of fears, lots of traumas, lots of pain, lots of uncertainties, and we try to create an image in the future that has less pain, less confusion. Perhaps our aims are a bit more clear, less fear, and we use the present by making sure that we have the tools of bringing the image we have of ourselves to life. For example, your mom told you some time ago, and let me just quickly talk about how the past comes about. We have no choice but to be, to some extent, enslaved to our past. Some pasts are good, some pasts are mediocre, because they're nothing but really a collection of experiences. They have to do with your own personal experience, they have to do with the family that brought you up, they have to do with your relatives, they have to do with the neighborhood in which you live, they have to do with your economical status, whether you're white or black or yellow, if you're an immigrant, how kind and understanding your parents are, how many times you've divorced, how many boyfriends or girlfriends you've had, the sort of culture you live, if the culture is one of tyranny or one of, I suppose, democracy, if the sort of advertisement that are given to you are religious in nature, philosophical in nature, or basically retail therapy advertisements of capitalism, consumerism. So that's our past. So if someone asks you who you are, you say, I am a collection of all the things I just mentioned. And whatever that you have experienced in the past, You're not going to remember everything that has happened to you. You're going to remember only those experiences that have been, to some extent, pleasant. And not all experiences that we have been pleasant. So what we do is we either observe them, take lessons from them, learn from them, and move on, or they are so traumatic that we repress them. We put them somewhere where we can't see and touch and smell them. So we can kind of walk a little bit freer, calmer. Now, let's say when you were 18 and you just graduated from high school, your mom sat you down and said, honey, I'll pay for your food, I'll pay for your rent, I'll pay for your laundry. Don't drop out of school, stay in school. Now, it's one thing to hear your mom, it's another to listen to what she's saying. It's yet another to understand what she's saying, because what your mom is basically saying is, I've been around, I've seen a lot of homeless people, I've seen a lot of people get to be 90, have a good amount of regret. I myself have a good amount of regret. I had all these opportunities in life, didn't really pursue them because I just didn't understand how important they were. I don't want you to repeat the same mistakes that I have. So as she's sitting you down and talking to you about all this stuff, you need to understand what she's saying is, سینه خواهم شرح شرح از فراق تا بگویم شرح درد اشتیاق. Your mom's heart, if there is such a thing, has been shattered into 1,001 pieces because she made some mistakes in her life. And she wants to make sure that your soul, your heart, your life remains intact. The only problem is when your mom sits you down, there is no longing inside you. Your aim is very different than your mom's, and that's the thing you need to understand in any relationship. If your aim is different than your companions, it's just not going to flow well. There comes a point where you may use the same words, but the intentions, the interpretations, the meanings are going to be very, very different. Okay? Now, so time passes, you kind of just have fun with your life. You get to a certain place in your life where you say, I'm 35, 40, or 50, or 60. I should have listened to my mom a long time ago. I didn't. And remember when your mom sat you down, you were 18. Now when you begin to kind of hear your own intuition and the messages it's trying to relate to you, you're about 40. So you travel back in time, some 22 years or so, and you vividly remember the kitchen table and your mom sitting looking at you and talking with you about all the stuff. And all of a sudden you make a decision. You say, Amir, you messed up big time, but you're still a young man, you're only 40. You can still do it. So what happens is you go online or you kind of call some of your friends, maybe your brother. There is a guy who teaches, I think, at the University of Washington. He's a professor of sociology. He's African American. His brother is serving time in prison, yet he himself, teaches at this big Ivy League school. And so at the age of 40, you say, okay, I've spoken to my brother. He says to me, I got to do A, B, C, D. And so what you do is, now remember, every past creates forces that give birth to addictions, to habits in thinking, habits to feeling, habits to perceiving things, interpreting things in a very, very particular way. But what happens is you have created an image of yourself that exists. If you go to school right now, sign up for the classes in the fall, hopefully you'll graduate in 2026. Good morning, Ms. Charlotte. So you say to yourself, by the time I'm 43, I'll be done. Okay. So what happens is you have a good amount of past inside you. Okay? And for any life to kind of be livable, to move forward, you need resources to make it work. This particular resource is going to be something unknown. You have never gone to school. You've never been focused on any subject for too long. Okay? So remember, the first thing that you need to understand for this future to come true, first, you have given yourself an aim. This is a tiny little seed that lives under an avalanche of past weeds, habits. There's a good chance that this aim will be forgotten unless it can be reinforced again and again and again and again, which means that the past is going to come forth every time that you want to pursue this. You're going to travel back in time. You're going to be enslaved by all the things that past time has created in your life, and they're going to kind of hold you hostage. While in the present, now that you have an aim, it means you have a conscience. In other words, there is this other self that's going to be fighting against the past self. And you're going to summon up or go to places and gather all these resources to keep this particular aim alive. Okay. I don't know as to why time moves fast or slow. I think for the most part, I think you're right, that when you're engaged in the present time or any time where there's a good amount of pleasure, one of the things that pleasure does, it captures you, consumes you. It pauses your ability to reflect and think about the past or future. You just kind of just engage and that's it. If on the other hand, what you're experiencing, for example, right now in this class, I'm losing you, I'm just rambling on nonsensical, and you go back to skydiving, you go back to, I wish I was home sleeping, then what's happening is the present gets captured by the past, the things that bring you pleasure, because this class certainly doesn't. Okay. Is there a way out of this particular time frame? That most of what has happened to us in the past gets projected into the future. And the only way you can create this future, in other words, the only way that you can make this future come to reality, is by being in the present, having resources. So remember this idea that all these, say, New Age gurus are telling us that forget your past, forget the future, live in the present. It's actually quite inaccurate. You and I have no identity without having a past. Your past is important. You need a future. That's your aim, that's your goal. You wouldn't be here otherwise. There is something about you that says, my past is no longer as meaningful as I thought it to be. I want to be a different human being. That is a goal to have, and it's a worthy goal. And how do you spend your present time? By making sure that you do what the obligations, for example, for this class are, so you can get to the future image. So remember, we are the sort of animals that occupy three spaces: past, future, and present. It's not past, present, and future. It's past, future, and present. Now, if someone, for example, says, I see my past, and I don't like it that much, or perhaps I like it, but it's no longer relevant, and I'm going to school, and I'm going to get a degree, but I find that the degree I'm going to get is also irrelevant. And all of a sudden you realize, yes, you do have the aim of going to school, but you have no idea what to do with the degree. So the aim itself begins to lack sufficient meaning. And now what you enter into the field of unknown. Now, I don't know how many of you in this class have dogs. I don't, but I've seen enough dogs to know that if your dog is not disciplined, if your dog is not trained, you have on your hand a very unhappy dog. If you want a happy dog, Get a coach. Train your dog. So when you clap your hands, the dog sits. When you smile, the dog jumps. When you whistle, the dog eats. When you tell the dog not to pee somewhere or poop somewhere, the dog says, fine, okay. Human beings, it seems, we are very much the same sort of animal, that we need to be trained. In other words, you need a GPS to function. If your future is unknown, there is nothing to guide our psyches. Chaos, confusion, fear, they all come in and they avalanche upon us. And it's not a pleasant feeling. Let me digress for a moment and just say something about men and women. You know, I read books that come from the Islamic tradition. I've read books that come from the Jewish tradition, the Buddhist tradition, Christian tradition. And all these traditions have one thing in common. The field is dominated by men. You can find a handful of women here and there in these traditions, but for the most part, you know, these religious philosophical traditions, they're just occupied, invaded by men. And I think there's a good reason for it. Women have a gift that I think, and I may be completely wrong, but I'll say it nevertheless. I think women have a gift that men don't. I don't know if there is a God. I don't know if there is a God, if God made it intentionally this way, or maybe it's just part of evolution. Women can get pregnant. Women have monthly cycles. Their body creates pain. Their body creates irritation. It's organic. It's not manufactured from the outside. There comes a point where the woman hears a whisper from inside that eventually turns into a roar. Give me a child. And then the woman spends the rest of her life taking care of her children, worrying about her children. Her heart is now outside, in the hands of her kids. And she sees it. She doesn't need meaning. Her body creates meaning for her. She doesn't need purpose. Her body creates purpose for her. Does she get frustrated? Absolutely. Does she once in a while hate the fact that she has children? Perhaps. Because it is stressful. Men, on the other hand, they're completely useless. They have to create mental children we call ideas. We have to create purpose. Now, if you were to take my assumption into the present time, where, you know, every time I go to In-N-Out, whether I'm eating my food in the car or actually going to the shop, sit for half hour and eat, when I get home, I kind of smell like In-N-Out, and I hate the way I smell. I quickly shower. See what happens when you enter a space where the space is contaminated by burgers. Imagine now women walking into a man's space, like a woman walking into In-N-Out. What's going to happen? The ambitions, the goals, the aims of men, the viciousness of men, the confusion of men are now going to be showered upon women's psyche. Is that going to make them slightly different? Absolutely. Is that going to create changes? Yes. Are women's psyche going to be morphed into a man's psyche? Probably. Are they now going to occupy two worlds, the masculine and the feminine? Probably. Are they, for the first time, going to have ambitions, desires, goals that never existed for women for thousands of years? Yes. Are those goals unknown for the most part? Yes. Do you and I take pleasure into entering an unknown relationship? No. We are not hippies. Okay. Now, if in the world of unknown there are no signposts, your fear is justified. It is legit. Do not read books, do not listen to teachers who tell you, don't fear, always live in the present. Well, that's a stupid thing to say. The present can't exist without resources from the past and aims for the future. You know, you go back in time and you realize that our Paleolithic tradition, our ancestors from the Stone Age era, when they buried bodies, they were tattooed. Some had besides them knives and daggers. But they believed that once you die, there is something waiting for you, and you better have some tools to fend them off. So this idea of unknown and fear has always been with us. And you don't really have to be philosophical about this stuff. You know, imagine what would happen to you if you just didn't have money for next month's rent. You would lose sleep. How do you get rid of the unknown? Power. And you hope that that power has a long shelf life. Let me tell you something I shared with my students yesterday. You know, when I've been in the classroom for about 30 years, and most of that 30 years, my schedule has been the following. I get to whatever campus I'm on around 5. I write till about 9. I come to class at 9, teach till about 10:15. Leave the classroom for 10 minutes, come back to classroom, teach from 10:30 to 12. Then I have 5 or 10 or 15 students who follow me to my office. Whatever food I have, we all sit and eat together. At 1 o'clock, I head to my class. I teach till about 2:30 or 2:15. Then I go back to the office. If I have a class at 2:30, I teach until about 4:30 or so. And then I go back to the office, I take a nap, and I get ready for my 6 o'clock evening class. There is not an element of unknown. And I have read enough books, and I have enough experience in the classroom where I can just wing it very eloquently. And so when I go to class and I say, okay, what do you guys want to talk about? I don't fear questions coming my way. And if, you know, there's a question out there that I have no experience and I don't have much reflection on, I just say, I don't really know, that's beyond me. So I've been beaten up by life enough times to know that there are times where you just need to kind of be humble enough to say, I have no idea what that question means. I have no idea what the answer to that question is. So for many years, my life had signposts. I knew exactly how my day is going to unfold. Now, as I get older, as I have less patience for my classes, for ideas, for interaction, I realize that I'm losing signposts. So when someone knocks on my office door, I have to sit back and say, should I open it? Should I not open it? What is going to be the conversation? Is it about a grade? Is it because someone has not done work for the past 15 weeks, and all of a sudden they're going to come to my office, give me a sob story so they can inspire me to have empathy and compassion and forgiveness so I can give them a C? Do I want that? My answer is no. Well, do I want someone who comes in and has a philosophical conversation with me? No, I'd rather just talk to myself. And I talk to myself by writing, by walking. And all of a sudden I realize all the things that used to give my life meaning are there no more. And so what happens to me? Say, really? Has my past become irrelevant? Because I do go back, to time. And I do kind of resurrect some of the corpses from the past, to look at them, observe them, see if they have any value, and I can't find much value in them. And as you get older, something even more devastating happens. Throughout the day, you think about mortality. In other words, you get old, you get sick, and you die. And then throughout the day, your prayer is really quite simple. I want to die without going through too much pain. A nice heart attack would be good. But the question then is, where exactly do I want to die? Do I want to die in the bathroom? Do I want to die in the showers? Do I want to die in the living room? Do I want to die in the classroom? A classroom would be fun. It's like dying in the battlefield. Your death has meaning, you know. You died while talking about Plato or Aristotle or Jesus. And when, especially, you've had a relatively rich life, and I think I have for the most part, been around ideas for most of my life, okay? Say, okay, well, I want to create a future goal for myself. So yes, I go to my office and I write. I hope to finish books. But then I go home and I have thousands of books sitting everywhere. I say, oh, there are all these books. What's the use of books? Okay, people read them. They're inspired. Then they forget. And then they go back. I mean, that's what I've done. You know? So why write books? Why do you have this aim of being published? Is it because of social status? Is it because you think you're important? Is it because you want to leave something for your parents, for your kids, for your wife? And then you ask, well, why the hell would I want to leave kids for my kids, for my wife? I just don't want to be forgotten. But what does it mean to be forgotten? That you spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years with someone, you either break up with them or you die, and like a ghost, once in a while you hover down, you look down and you say, oh, my companion is holding hands with that other person. Really? For 20 years you were holding my hand, and I'm so easily replaceable? How is that possible? That is good enough to create a good amount of anger inside you. Now, living in the cradle of unknown, if the unknown has become your companion, in other words, you think about it when you wake up, you think about it throughout the day, and you think about it before you go to bed, something about you begins to long and yearn for something. Because when you live in the cradle of unknown, there is no stability to you. And unknown eventually, I don't know if any of in this class have ever suffered from depression. What happens is depression is like this black hole that deletes all of your past. And if you want to know who you are your past and you are your future. And depression removes your past and removes your future. And all you have is the present. But it's like walking into a house that has no furniture. It has no appliances. It has nothing. Not even electricity. There are no lights. And depression is this cradle of darkness. Is it true that once in a while you're inspired enough to go for a walk? Absolutely. Is it true that once in a while you have good, shining, illuminating days? Definitely. How long do they last? Maybe an hour if you're lucky. Maybe 2 if you're really, really lucky. Maybe a day if the gods really like you. But for the most part, they last for no more than half hour, maybe to an hour, or maybe 2 hours. Then you go back into this pit. Now, the problem with yearning and longing is that it can only scream for so long. Because whether you're a person of faith, agnostic, atheist, it matters very little. We can exercise patience, we can exercise screaming and longing for only so long. If there are no answers coming back to us, eventually we find the yearning and the longing themselves being irrelevant and meaningless. Then there is nothing to yearn for. Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher around the 19th, I think, century, maybe early 20th century, I forget. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher around the 18th century. Kant was a very optimistic philosopher. He considered human beings to be rational, sensible, the ability to reason, have a relatively good life. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, he was cranky, he was dark, he was gloomy. And in response to Immanuel Kant's optimism, I used to read this particular paragraph that Schopenhauer had written some time ago. I no longer do it, but perhaps I should. It goes something like this, that, and of course, Kant was Protestant, he was a very religious man. And Schopenhauer said something that Mark Twain had mentioned. If God really created human beings, there must really be something wrong with God, especially the human notion that God is perfect. Look at our minds. Look at our brains. We are always going to be limited, which means that our knowledge is going to be limited, which means that there are always going to be blind spots, which means that whenever you make a decision about anything, there are things you haven't seen, there are things you haven't noticed, which means they'll come back to bite you. If God demands perfection from human beings, maybe God should have created human beings to be a bit more insightful. Consider for a moment the physical stature of the human being. I don't know if monkeys suffer from a backache, but human beings do. And a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing should have designed the human body a bit better. How about our eyesight? Owls really see well at night. We don't. Everything about human life, Schopenhauer argues, is a mistake. Everything. And once you realize this, not because you've read in a book. You know, the best book any one of us in this class could ever read, the best book, is the book of your own experiences. Don't listen to other people and what they say about you. You listen to your own book. Read the book. But the problem with reading the book of experiences, first you need to be interested in reading the book. Then you have to have the capacity to endure how horrifying your story is and be okay with the eruption of all these negative emotions, because that's what you and I are going to see when you read your own life experiences. Add to it the fact that you and I have plans for the future. And when you realize that our plans for the future is as whimsical, as infantile as all the plans we had for the past or in the past, well, you can't really walk around being a happy chap.